Thank you all for being back. I hope you had the opportunity to witness the performance led by Ling Tan just earlier, which I think is a lovely, a very relevant introduction to the topic we're going to address now, which is participatory design and involving communities into designing solutions. So I will really shortly present everyone that's on the stage. So at the very left, we have Rama Gheerawo. He's the director of the Helen Hamlin Center for Design. So this is all about inclusive design, and he will talk a bit more about this. Then we have Larisa Blazic, which is involved in one of our STARTS residencies called Data Union Fork, which is about digital citizenship and smart contracts. And she will, obviously I just don't tell more about that because you will talk a bit more about it later. Then we have Ling, that you hopefully met just before, which was one of our residents and is working about involving people in monitoring of air quality. Then we have Foteini Setaki, which is part of the design studio called the New Row, which are doing large-scale 3D printing out of plastics and recycled materials, and they are working with a project called I have a blank. The Plastic Twist, and working on involving people in designing solutions based on these recycling of plastics. And on the very right, we have Clare Patey, which is an artist and the director of the Empathy Museum. So I guess that's all. I will handle the mic to Rama. So here you go.
Cheers, thank you very much. So we have an hour together, which sounds like a long time, but it's going to fly by. I'm going to talk for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and then we've asked each of our panelists to speak for about 5 minutes. Please, if you could stay as close to 5 as possible, otherwise we'll have to bodily remove the mic from you. That would be great, because we want to have questions and discussions. I know it's always difficult as an audience to ask the first question. So when it comes to question time, we're going to jump straight to the second question, so that just makes it easier for everyone. Participatory design, well, it's a term that's been around for about 20 years now. Some people say it originated in Scandinavia, but we have many, many different terms for this. Co-design, co-creation, community design, community activism. All of these terms speak to a more democratized version of design. And for myself, I've been working in inclusive design, which looks at including the needs of the widest number of people for the last 20 years. I think I'm a designer, an engineer by training. And when I graduated from college, I had a deep dissatisfaction with design. And that is, it didn't include people. I trained as a pretty traditional industrial designer, but my life since then has been anything but traditional. And the 4 panelists that sit next to me, their work is inspirational, informative. It moves the boundaries of these conversations. And why should we have people participate in the design process? I mean, don't designers know it all? Well, actually, they don't. It never fails to surprise me how many companies, how many organizations don't actually consult the people they are working with, the communities that sit around them. You know, one major Korean phone manufacturer, you can probably guess who they are. When we started working with them 12 years ago, their manuals were written by 3 people, none of whom had a single customer-facing bone in the body. One was an engineer and the other 2 were lawyers. So the lawyers were there to make sure the engineers didn't say anything that could get the company in trouble. So right from that point, have been very interested in design for community. The work that we do at the centre, I run in London, is very centered around people and community. It goes beyond traditional approaches to design. We've worked with Qatari migrant workers in Qatar. We've looked at issues of age exclusion by age, ability, gender, geography. So I've been really interested to look at all of your work and kind of learn about everything that you do. I think one of the themes that kind of emerges for me is this kind of unity of community in all of your work. You know, how you bring a community together. And it spans very different things. You know, we will start off with Larisa talking about data and communities that are built around data. We will then move into the sort of curatorial world, the art world, talking about empathy, which sits at the heart of the conversation with Clare. And then Foteini, really interesting website, you know, looking at digital design, the kind of womb to tomb kind of design, and how that plays out in terms of rapid manufacturing and city design. And then we'll come back to the environment. We've saved, excuse me, thirsty work this. We've saved you, Ling, for last, just so we can come back to the experiment that you just ran. So I think finally to bring that word empathy in, I recently had the task of writing a chapter on design thinking, read many books and papers. People disagree on what it is, but the one thing they all agree on is empathy. And I think there's another challenge here of, I think in design we focus on the individual. You guys talk about communities, and there is a gap there between designing for an individual and designing for community. You know, there's commonalities, but there's also divergences. So you all deal with big topics. I think there's a call to action and to activism in all of your work. And I just want to sort of kick off with a quote which talks about empathy, because quite often in design, we talk about the egotistical designer, the designer as the person who knows what people want. And that is a decades-old definition, but it still hangs around a little, I feel. So, you know, that kind of power and empathy, that play between the two, I just want to encapsulate in a 4-line poem from India's poet laureate Rabindranath Tagore, who was a contemporary of Einstein. And he said this: "Power said to the world, 'You are mine,' and she imprisoned him on her throne. Love or empathy said to the world, 'I am yours,' and she gave him the freedom of her house." And I think this is what we look for in participatory design, is combined freedoms, is co-design and co-creation in a world that we can draw together both solutions, problems and issues and work together. So with that introduction, I'm going to hand over to Larisa to talk to us about data privacy, protections, and the workshops you've been doing with citizens as part of your ongoing STARTS residency.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me here at the panel. And thanks for the STARTS residency. So yeah, let's just do a really short introduction. When in the preparation of the panel, we received a few questions to think about, to prepare ourselves. And it was the first question was, what influenced you to start with participatory design? And I started thinking about the kind of well, not that way back, but about 10 years ago, there was the whole wave of participatory art in the UK. I'm based in London, and so I was observing without much experience at that point, artists kind of doing almost like a social work and being there to facilitate creativity for citizens of various locations. And I was kind of feeling challenged by the whole thing, because for brief moment it really felt like, what is with the artist in that process? How does an artist practice their own creativity in that whole environment? And soon enough, I tried it myself, and I co-created a piece of software for online video and for collaborative video installation making, and really jumped straight into kind of co-creating video material that was reflecting on urban regeneration in the East London area called Dalston. And it was a very anxiety-filled state at the very beginning, because it was for the first time I did not know, not that I didn't know before what will be the outcome of the work, but this was a really interesting situation where you had to trust your participants or your collaborators that they will also come through, and so that you together in conversation will actually produce something that is worthwhile for everybody and for the wider public and audience. And so that was my first kind of a plug into the participatory way of thinking. Along with the actual process of creating the work and negotiating with community groups that were taking part in the project, I was also working on a free software, which by definition is open, collaborative, and it exists because people take on participation quite literally. And so that was another feed, that was another avenue of information that I was receiving, and an inspiration that I was receiving, together with I suppose copyleft attitude, the licensing that I was learning about, that was encouraging cross-pollination, cross-examination, collaboration, as well as what was the last thing I wanted to say? Wish I'll remember. I was. And then, because I was teaching for quite a long time graphic design at University of Westminster, which is now in my past, it was really interesting to test these ideas, the ideas of kind of a collective design work. And it was really interesting to, through a module that I co-created with a colleague of mine, Katie Hayes, called Authorship and Interaction, it was a really nice polygon to really test the idea of authorship, the construct that is very strong in our disciplines, even though the technology, the digital medium itself enables multiple copies, remixes, and everything else. So all of these things together have really informed my practice. And to cut the long story short, to come to data union folk, which, you know, a union by definition will imply collective participatory action, where there's no one but a group of people contemplating together, thinking, conversing, and eventually kind of asserting themselves in relation to the powers that be. And that's it. Yeah. Is that 5 minutes? Fantastic.
Beautifully on time. You've even got a little space to breathe. So thank you very much, Larisa. A great kickoff to this kind of collective participatory panel. If we can switch to the other side of the panel and ask Claire to give us her 5 minutes. You know, I really loved looking at your website, particularly the Everything Must Go exhibition, the Old Dog New Tricks, and the fact that you actually do want to put a bull in a china shop. So over to you.
Hi. I just wanted to say before I started that I'd like to say thank you to STARTS for having me here on the panel, and as one of the 1 million people who marched in London last weekend, it's fantastic to be with my friends from Europe. I run a project called the Empathy Museum. I'm an artist and I'm a curator. I create projects, public spaces, I stage interventions where communities of people can come together to talk and discuss, to eat together, to learn, to play, and to create things as a new community of people. I'm not a designer, but I think hopefully that some of the things that I say are relevant for both kind of processes. All the images I'm going to show you in my very brief 5 minutes are from projects that I've done, but I'm not going to have time to tell you about them. But if you want to ask a question afterwards or whatever, that's totally fine. All projects start with the central tenet that they're going to be participatory, they're going to be collaborative, and they're going to be interdisciplinary. So they're going to be putting the audience at the heart of the process, and with agency to co-create, to play, and to collaborate. Whether that be something as simple as, well, it's not simple, but it's a simple idea, closing a bridge in central London and asking 35,000 people to come and eat together, or creating a new cultural space for 5 years that's going to be looking at questioning what the cultural space of the museum is. They're very different outcomes, but they've got the same kind of central set of, I suppose, ideas around what the participant is. I currently run a project called A Mile in My Shoes, which is part of the Empathy Museum. And the Empathy Museum is envisaged as an alternative high street. So it's a series of shops, but instead of coming for a consumerist experience, you're going to come for a human experience. And I guess it is a response in a way to perceived declining levels of empathy in the world, a rise in global conflict and increasingly divided communities. The first project is called A Mile in My Shoes, and it's a shoe shop. And it's inside a shipping container that's designed to look like a giant shoebox. And basically it travels around the world, and it houses a collection of shoes and of stories that belong to people from the local community in which we find ourselves. And that could be anyone from a sheep farmer to a brain surgeon to a sex worker to a refugee. The youngest person is 6, the oldest person's 101. That we currently have a collection of over 350 pairs of shoes and stories. And the idea is you come into the shoebox, you get given a pair of shoes that belong to a stranger, you go out and you walk a mile in that person's shoes while you listen to them on a MP3 and a pair of headphones telling you a story about their life. And I guess it also kind of works as a model. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can see a project we did with across the NHS in England, looking at stories from everyone from a prison psychiatrist to a cardiac surgeon, and we showed it in the Houses of Parliament so that policymakers could walk in the shoes of the people delivering the service. When I started talking about participation and co-creation, I think I identified kind of 4 things that I think are really central that I'll just run through really quickly. But I think they apply to everything and every project that I do. And running through all of them is, like you were just saying, is this theme of trust. You've got to trust your idea, you've got to trust your process, and you've got to trust the public and the people you're working with. And the first one of these, I think, is the art of the invitation. And it sounds simple, but there needs to be a real clarity about what you're inviting people to do and what you're asking them to take part in. And they need to get the idea, they need to feel secure about what you're asking them to do, but they need to have enough freedom within that to be able to contribute, to take it in a direction that they want to take it. So here you've got people making a museum about themselves, and you've got people walking a mile in each other's shoes. And participation can be on loads of different levels. I haven't got time to go into that now, but I just wanted to say something about the invitation. The second thing is about staying authentic, I think, to the original idea, so that the parameters are set, and everything that happens, right from someone crossing over the threshold of the project, making a piece of print, doing anything about it, it all has to remain authentic to that aesthetic and to that central idea, whether that's making mayonnaise on a bridge or contributing to a crowdsourced library or wandering around in some mobile garden salad hats. The other thing would be about leaving space. I think there is well, I certainly have a propensity to try and fill things up and to think I need to entertain people. But actually, I think the simplicity of that's a feast on the bridge, and that's closing a bridge across the Thames in London, and the simplicity of just putting the tables down the centre of the bridge. I did do a whole load of other things around it, but I think that leaving the space for people to come and to fill that space with their own ideas, their own conversation, whatever they're bringing to the experience, is a really important thing. And I think the last thing is to expect the unexpected. So I guess it's about leaving room again for what people bring. But this is at Feast on the Bridge. I'd set up a lovely amphitheatre of hay bales for children to have storytelling. And I'd been up all night setting up the project, and I saw this little boy just like picking up some of this hay and chucking it at his friend. And I was like, no, please don't do that. That wasn't what I had planned for this. And I had to walk to the other end of the bridge. And as I walked to the other end of the bridge, I looked back and I saw 200 people throwing hay at each other and having a massive fight in the centre of London. And I was really upset. I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? And then I thought, actually, how often do you see urban people playing in the hay? And it became kind of people were going, we're coming back next year for that hay fight. And it kind of became this central thing. And so these people, I guess it's like a bit like having a party where you've set up the like wine and the music and the candles and all your living rooms looking great. And then like an hour later, everyone's in your tiny kitchen. It's that kind of thing. You have to just leave room and to think people are going to bring something to this that you could not have even imagined, and they are going to be enriching that project beyond something that you could have conjured up. And I think that's all I'm going to say for the moment. But I'm sure some other things will come out in the discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claire. Some really clear advice as well. So we will now move to Foteini and talking about plastic twist, the new raw, a whole host of multidisciplinary ideas in your work. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, in our case, our studio, The New Raw, we started from the observation that we consume a lot of resources and generate enormous amounts of plastic waste. Only today in this panel, I'm surrounded by 6 plastic bottles and cups to drink water. And what we realized when started working in this topic was that actually household plastic waste that is a very challenging waste stream because it contains a lot of different types of plastic, faces a very important problem, and that is that people are actually not so much believing in the idea of recycling. I come from Greece, for example, and there people really think that even though they might do separation at their household, usually the government will just mix it and landfill it. So we wanted to give a solution that not only shows a better way for using plastic in long-lasting and easy-to-trace applications, but also gives a motivation to the citizens to be part of the recycling process of plastic by donating their material into our project, and in that way being able to design also public space. So what we did was actually to introduce into the recycling process of plastic participatory design by using new technologies. Basically, for the design process, we developed a website where people, through a kind of questionnaire, they kind of express what they want and need for their public space. And as soon as they design the furniture they need, they get to know what is the equal amount of plastic they need to contribute to the project in order to be realized. And what is interesting in our case, I believe, is that by using 3D printing, we can really support the idea of customizing public space. So, for example, even in a case where every citizen has a different need, we can easily support it by using this technology that actually is based on the idea that every product can be unique. When we actually started working on this idea in Thessaloniki. It's a city in Greece. And there what we realized is that actually, even though everybody likes the idea of customization and being part in the design process of a city, when you talk with the municipality, that's a problem. And the problem is because, first of all, maintenance can become a problem. If every bench is different, how can you solve that? And also, the image of the city can become very difficult if everybody starts expressing themselves. So we had to go through certain discussions with the municipality and understand how much space of freedom can we have. And at the end, we found a mid solution where we actually pre-designed a lot of options, and then basically the designs that the citizens are submitting through our website are already having the permission from the municipality to be realized. So in that case, you really know that, okay, if somebody's uploading this idea in the website, it can be really realized without, let's say, any modifications. When we started working on this project, we did also a digital campaign, and within 3 weeks, we managed to receive 3,000 submissions. So 3,000 different designs where people could express in which location of the city they wanted to place the new furniture, but also what kind of needs they have, for example, to place to park their bikes, more green, stuff like that. And discussing with the citizens, what we realized is that what they appreciated the most was that actually by involving them both in the collection process and the design process, we kind of made the recycling process transparent. And basically, that motivated them much more to be into doing separation, but also understanding that it's a very valuable material and it shouldn't be discarded that easily as we do in our everyday life. So for us, in our project, participatory design was a tool to actually motivate people behave differently in terms of using plastic in our everyday life. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So Larisa and Foteini are actually STARTS residents at the moment, but we have an alumna to finish us off.
Fresh alumni.
So
just finished 1 month ago, I think. Yeah. Yes.
So please tell us about your experience.
Thank you. So thank you, STARTS Residency, again, for letting me do the performance as well. It's my first time in Paris doing the performance, which is very interesting, just because Paris been having its, the Paris Agreement happens in Paris, and also is very much involved in climate change. So I think just instead of talking about just the project itself, I kind of want to talk about, I guess, my practice and how it involves participatory design. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Okay, slides, yes. Okay, okay, just a few slides. But anyway, so just a bit of background on who I am, because I was trained as an architect, but right now I'm doing more of designer, maker, and coder in my everyday life. And my own practice works falls somewhere within the genre of urban design, wearable tech, citizen participation, and Internet of Things. And in a sense, it's kind of broadly termed within the smart city context, because I work in a company in East London where we build urban technology with local authorities and tech companies. And my work has always been interested in how people interact with the built environment through the use of technology. In this case, for me, in my practice, I focus on wearable technology as a tool. And the work that I do involves me working on the ground with communities in different cities and countries in using different wearable technology to get people to express their relationship with the city. So there are things like air quality or the safety of walking on the streets, or just the young people's relationship with the city that they lived in. So it touches a lot on race, gender, and demographics as well, as a result of kind of working, because wearable is such an individual thing, you kind of have to work one-on-one, but at the same time work within the workshop context. So a lot of my work involved workshopping, and then there will be some element of a performance at the end of it as an output. But I'm always interested in kind of the social system that really ties people together. And I guess inherently as an architect, teamwork has always been built within it, because cities and buildings are not built by one person, but by many people along different stages. So I've always been interested in how people really build up the cities together through, in a sense, their subjective experience of going through the city. And for me, in a sense, wearable is a tool, but I'm not interested in the passive wearable, which is very common in commercial wearables, where you get a lot of gimmicky competition sports type thing with wearables. I'm more interested in really how does the future look like when you have wearable that connects with each other and that you have the ability to communicate through haptic or other types of communication. And in a sense, for me, cities are made out of many interconnected systems. So you have the visible things like data and numerical value, but you really have the invisible things like the political, cultural, social system that binds people together. So I'm really interested to interrogate those systems through it. And just in my work itself, I work a lot with children, young people, adults, authorities, and tech companies. And for me, the reason why I work within participation itself is because I think it is such an interesting thing regarding structuring participation, especially when you work on the ground in workshop context. When you work with children, there's different ways of communicating across, for example, air quality. And when you work with local authorities, how do you get the message across in which they really understand to a certain level what the issue is, but how do you take the next step forward to make a change? So it's really interesting how you, and challenging how you talk to people differently in this context. And for me, the participation as a structure, it helps, in a sense, address three things: accountability, responsibility, and agency. Because working within the field of technology itself, it's very easy to look towards technology to make decisions for you. When technology is making decisions, they take things away from you. For example, data is collected on your behalf, and algorithm is running because of that. And what happened is that it removes, first of all, accountability, because people will be saying, it wasn't me, it was the data that's responsible. It removes responsibility because it means nobody wants to take ownership of the outcome. And thirdly, it removes that sense of agency because it feels like technology is doing everything for you and you don't have to do anything. So for me, I'm really interested to work from the very beginning to get people to, in a sense, co-create what their experience is through to the end, to the performance itself, in certain sense. And just some challenges that I've seen along the way with working with people is, I think, first of all, is, again, the structuring of participation. How do you get people who disagree with each other to converse with each other? I guess that's really what's happening with the political scene nowadays, right? People do not talk to each other. How do you get people to talk? That's something that I still haven't really quite figured out, but I think something I'm interested to work on. Also, it's not really just the loud people or the opinionated people that has the right to say things. What happened to other people who are in the background? How do you get them forward to have equal platform in talking? And also with working with communities, the issue is also the issue of parachuting in. I might come into Paris to do a project itself, but I'm not a Parisian. So there's also always the issue of, are you a local working within local context? And I think one of the things that I always try to make as much effort on is working with local partners and community organizations that they then become the face to work with the communities for us. So in a sense, that's quite important, and it also helps instill a sense of ownership to people who's working in the context itself. And again, I think the last thing is really the language of communication again. You have to make things simple, but not dumbing down. When you talk to children, just because it's air quality, it doesn't mean they don't know anything. What was interesting is when I work with children, they know so much more than adults, whereas adults have so much baggage in their back, like local authorities and tech companies, because they represent someone else, so they can't say the things that they should. They know the answer is do the things that improve air quality, but you can't because you have the baggage. So it's quite interesting in that sense. So yeah, I'm going to stop at that, actually. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think a beautifully participatory as well as political message there, especially at a time where, as a British citizen, I feel more European than ever, so thank you. Being participatory ourselves, I like to think, I want to kick off just by asking the panelists, because you're also speaking, but you're also listening to each other, if there's any comments you'd like to make on each other's presentations. And meanwhile, if you could get that second question ready. So does anyone want to comment on anyone else's presentations?
I think I want to,
Please.
but I'm not sure how. Let's see. So I want to follow up on the responsibility agency, I think, and what was the third one? Accountability. Because if kind of thinking about what is the purpose of participatory design or participatory art, I would try and think about it as almost like a training for direct democracy and participatory budgeting and real active engagement in our civil societies. That this is like a step beyond. It's almost like we are in the playground, we are practicing, teaching each other how to negotiate, how to do things, how to talk to each other in order to arrive to a place of consensus or compromise or some form of agreement. And I think I forgot what was the point.
No,
sorry.
You made a great point about consensus, which is something we can come back to. Claire?
Although I agree with that, I think that maybe there's a stage before that I think I suppose I wouldn't approach something thinking that behaviour change has to be the headline of it. I would approach something where I think that the main things are around who's in the room, who's taking part, and then to do with imagination and play, I think, that, and I would hope that those things come before the moment where the things about responsibility, I think they would come naturally from it, but I think I would start from a place where it's got to be kind of fun.
Yeah. Make democracy fun. There's a book about it.
Quick, trademark it. Please, no.
I agree with you, because I think that, in the sense, the underlying meaning has always got to, in a sense, you have to ask yourself what the goal of doing this type of work is. But I do agree that you have to, at the same time, make it fun so that people engage with it. Because if you lose that engagement, the empathy part is lost, and you don't connect them directly to the topic that you want to talk about. And I think a lot of times with participatory design, I've seen a lot of work where it falls short because people forgot that the essence is also in how you talk to people about this. And yeah, there's something there that's to be said.
And just to make it a quartet, I don't know, Foteini, do you want to say anything at this stage?
No, I was just thinking that in our case, through our experience, what we noticed that actually also the end goal, being able to create something, was very much engaging for our community. So at the beginning, since the beginning, they know that they will create something for public space, and that already you have them with you. Yeah.
Thank you. So let's open it up to the floor.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm from the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. I'm thinking a lot about your participants, and this kind of goes back to the point that you were talking about earlier, Rama, about inclusion and including different kinds of audiences. How much do each of you think about who is participating, and how concerned are you to ensure that it's not always the same person who's participating, or it's perhaps somebody that wouldn't have even thought to participate?
Great question there. So looking at the gatekeepers, the visible, the invisible, and the people, as you said, Claire, expect the unexpected in terms of participants. So who wants to take that first?
Well, to talk about it really briefly in terms of the Empathy Museum, in terms of A Mile in My Shoes, we would go like totally out of our way to ensure that we were trying to get the most diverse set of voices and stories in the box. And then because the box, the shoebox, arrives in a town centre and is a kind of unexpected thing that looks a bit strange, I think the people who come into it aren't necessarily the people who would normally perhaps walk through the doors of a great artistic institution. So, and then the idea is simple. So you can go, hey, how about you can explain it in 2 seconds and someone will get it. And so I hope, therefore, you've got those kind of 3 levels of encouraging the diversity of the visitor, the diversity within the storytelling. And like whoever said, you go out through those local networks and you go out through the networks of people who already are in touch with those people, and then through the audio producers and through mentoring schemes that we have with audio producers, we would hope that we were representing a wide range of people in terms of who's collecting those stories. And then doing themed versions around things like migration, or themed versions around experiences being a teenager or whatever, then you're completely beginning to widen the sphere a bit.
Thank you. Ling, did you want to say something?
Okay. I think for my work, especially because there are cases where I work with young people, so in a sense, you also need to make sure the space is safe for the participant to talk about things. But in the case of air quality itself, what we have tried to do a lot is that we involve as much, in every location that we do, we make sure we get the local authorities to participate in it. Because the thing you want to avoid, especially with such a touchy topic, is to get people screaming in their silo and not having any action taken. What you want to do is to work upstream so that the local council know what's happening. They heard what the citizens are talking about. They have the accountability to do something with it. So we, as much as we can, get them involved in doing the walk together with the participant, but also making sure that people like the experts are not overpowering. So in any case, we also, in the sense, we remove the air quality expert in workshop session, because there are things that we already know with air quality that we do not need an expert to talk down on us on. So in that case, that's a special thing that we try to make an effort to do.
Thank you. And could we shift to the other question? There was a lady right at the back here.
Hi, my name is Larisa Blazic. Just finished my residency now with STARTS. And my question, I found your talk very interesting, mainly to know that you're coming from very diverse background, you're living in different countries. And as artists today, we work kind of globally, we moved quite a lot. And when we talk about designing or creating work for a specific space, we always have the umbrella of the global community that we already have in the internet, for example. And I wonder how much the question of globalized society is playing a role into when you're designing a new work of art, if it's specific, how much you're really considering, if you always work only with the community that you're really familiar with, or can you just say, I'm going right now to a country I don't really know, but I'm working for them, trying to create something for this kind of a group of people. How much space you really give to the research of the local space, to go into your own design and your own thinking of your own influences, knowing of the limitation of the local and versus the global, for example.
Thank you. So could I ask Larisa and Foteini to perhaps respond to this? Who wants to go first?
Start?
Please.
Well, in our case, for example, the methodology, and the design, the digital design platform where people can actually express what they need for public space. We could say that this is the global approach, like the method we use. However, what we do, because it has to do with public space, it's very context sensitive. So every time you have a new case study, a new location, the content of this platform needs to be adjusted to that local community. So in our case, that's the way we work on that. So we have a specific method of working, but every time you need to adjust it based to the localities, and especially waste management. It's a very local thing. Even within a country, different cities may have a different system for separating their waste. So you really need to be informed about all that, and otherwise you kind of push your way away from that community if you're not informed. Yeah.
Larisa?
Yeah, I can follow up on this in context of Data Union Folk work that I've been doing. The code project to which Data Union Folk is linked is they are working in Amsterdam and Barcelona, and so they are engaging directly on the ground with local communities, building on case studies that are relevant to those localities. I come in with a Data Union proposition kind of on top of this to test the technology and also to use design methodologies or maybe subvert software design methodologies and open it up for participation and conversation. But because the problem is so global, personal data extraction, abuse, and so on. I don't want to give out too much. I'll present after this session. It's so huge, but at the same time, it needs to work as a methodology for organization and discussing how do you organize as a union group. So what I decided from very early in the project is that I will release all of the engagement material under a set of copyleft licenses, free artistic license, and so on, so that whoever needs or wants it can reuse it, redesign it, build it, and modify it, and redistribute to their needs. So that's one possible avenue to follow.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Was everything clear? Was that someone raising their hand or scratching their nose?
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely. It saves me asking one, so please.
I was interested in what you were saying about how we get people who disagree with each other in a room. And I wondered whether anyone's got any suggestions.
Anyone from the audience or anyone from the panel? Anyone in the room?
Food.
Yeah. Did that work on the bridge?
Yeah, but I can't monitor whether they were a group of people who were. I don't know who. So many people came. I don't know who they were. So I don't know whether they disagreed with each other before they came. But it's always a good way to break down a whole load of things. And I suppose getting people to do things together is good.
Yeah.
You know, if you get people building flat pack furniture together or whatever, it doesn't really matter what their views are. I mean, I'm sure that if you've got a common goal.
Yeah. I think, you know, just to build on that question a little bit, because it sort of turns people from passive participants into active engagements and authors of their own solutions as well. You know, do any of the other panelists have any tips or tricks or any barriers that you came across? You know, Foteini, you had 3,000 applications, for instance. And I always remember this case study in the very early days of participatory design being used as a kind of cautionary tale. And it was a company called Local Motors who co-designed a car with about 5,000 people on Twitter. And it looked like a dog's dinner. I don't know if you've ever seen Homer Simpson from The Simpsons when he designed a car, and it looked like that. And it's a sort of cautionary tale that people use. But just, you know, it's not something that I personally believe in. I think we need to be doing this. But what are the kind of, you know, what are the war stories or, you know, instances when you've had to overcome this? How did you manage to get 3,000, you know, kind of ideas?
That's an interesting
down?
question, because actually when we were preparing the design platform, we tried to keep it open and give as many possibilities to the user as possible. And then what we realized, the downside in this case is that actually giving many options, you cannot get a good majority at the end. So maybe the most popular, let's say, opinions could have a good 6%. So it was very difficult to actually find one opinion for like a majority for each aspect of the design. So at the end, what we did was to actually break down the design components to simpler questions, and then from each simplified question, take the majority. For example, the location, that was the only case that because we were giving only 4 options, that we got a good majority, and there we had 48% who wanted one location. So that was good. But then the rest, like, for example, do you need more parking places for your bike, or, for example, recycling bins? There were so many different opinions because we gave a lot of options that at the end we decided to actually cluster them around topics. So, for example, environment and leisure, etc., and kind of make it easier for us. But that was something we learned, that in our case, that actually sometimes giving the full spectrum of options the result is this Twitter car design.
Yeah, or the British Parliament.
So yeah, we had to yeah.
But why not thinking about it from a slightly different angle? Why not, I'm sure that you've been doing this as well, allow for diversity of outcomes instead of just one outcome? I mean, we in design world know the design by committee, or is that how the saying goes?
That is the saying.
It's don't go there, yeah. But at the same time, it's kind of thinking about it as a wider compromise in the context of urban design and urban environment. And so we kind of can, at this stage, make an assumption. There are certain needs that needs to be fulfilled, and then there is time. And over the time, one group gets satisfied, and then the other group, and then or some kind of process like that, maybe.
And I know, Ling, you work in East London. That's full of diverse opinions. How do you do it?
Yeah, tons of diverse opinion there. But I think what is interesting about what you were saying, I feel like sometimes with the culture that we are in, we are made from very young to learn that simplicity is the best solution. And in a sense, we grew up with the idea that a simple one idea or a broad idea of something that makes sense to everyone works. So in the case of the Twitter car, the reason, I do argue that the reason why people don't understand that car is possibly because they were grown up to know that simple stuff is beautiful rather than a messy thing. And if we were able to inverse that relationship in our thinking, to think that a project can have diverse outcomes and cluster into one thing, I think that will solve a lot of issues that's happening in the world as well, with diverse opinions, that we do not just have to vote for one person just because, they might not represent everything. So that's kind of reaction to what I think regarding messy design and embracing the idea of the messy city, where cities are really messy inherently. How do you actually create something that is not just simple but works for everyone? Yeah.
So I think we've got a couple of minutes left, and what I'd just like to do is to ask each of the panelists to either summarize a thought, a reflection, or a piece of advice, starting with Larisa and moving on, and to give you time to think. I'm going to do that myself, because I won't ask you to do anything I'm not prepared to do myself. I think the point that we've sort of landed on is that of choice, and the inclusive design movement, which is about including people in the design process. We used to have a saying 20 years ago that it was one size fits all, and now we talk about one size fits one. So it's about choice, it's about diversity, it is about are pulling that together. And just to play back some of the words, I've been making notes there. I haven't been doing my homework, but been making notes on the things you've said. And some of the words that I've heard have been, you know, self-reflection, play, customizing, trust, and, you know, I love this thing of expecting the unexpected. So that's certainly something that I'll be taking away from this. And Larisa, over to you for your final statement or sentence.
Be kind and respectful to each other.
Beautiful.
And to selves.
Yeah, beautiful. She set the bar high.
I was going to say world peace. It's a very pageant language. I think one thing that, I mean, you brought out, which is empathy, such a powerful thing, which a lot of people know we need to empathize, but people don't actually carry it out in their everyday life. So I guess, yeah, it's like take a step back and really look at people around you, and do you have trust in each other? That's one thing to ponder upon.
Foteini.
Okay, I was not prepared for this. Usually I'm very bad in this kind of reflections. But yeah, maybe I was intrigued by this last point of whether, for example, how you can actually, all these diverse results can be implemented, for example, in the final phase of producing public space. And of course, there more pragmatic reasons may come, like permissions for the municipality or whatever. But it's interesting to keep that in mind, like all these, let's say, different colors that come on the surface because of this participatory approach, how they can be maintained through the full process of a project. Yeah.
Thank you. And Claire, finally.
I think there's something about listening that we haven't talked about, which is about how we become better listeners. And I'd say that was really important.
Such a powerful note to end on. It underpins everything. So, ladies and gentlemen, could I have a big hand for Larisa, for Ling, for Foteini and Claire? Wonderful panel.